Welcome to the workshop about starting your own game company. I think from basement to corner office. Other one go? Yeah, you're kind of in a corner office.
Yes, with other people.
How to start, or as Dan will tell you, most likely don't start your own game company. So who are we? This is Dan Baker. He's one of the founders of Oxide and the graphics architect. He's been in the game industry for 15 plus years. Worked prior to Oxide, he was at Microsoft and Firaxis. Worked on many titles. Do you want to say anything else about what you've done?
I'll take a little more when we talk about the studio, but we'll go in the background.
Can we talk about the studio? Okay.
Yeah, we'll go into a little more there.
So, there are a set of slides. I don't know if Dan's really looked at them.
I looked them at the plane.
And we may not follow them specifically. If you have questions at any time, ask. We're not going to spend 2 hours giving you slides. This is meant to be interactive, so you can ask us questions about things you want to know. So who am I? I'm Andrew Baker. I've been in the game industry for about 9 months. But prior to that, I had a lengthy career in network security, doing engineering operations management. And I've worked with numerous startups. I'd say one of those was successful and 3 were failures. And I'll get into a little bit more about the failures when we talk about on one of the next slides. And then I got an MBA at one point after working with several startups.
That one success is not Oxide.
Yeah, the one success is not Oxide. Oxide is still TBD. But after working with several startups that kind of fell apart, I got an MBA to learn a little bit about managing a business, and now I get to do a lot of day-to-day operations for running a business. So Dan knows all about the game industry and how to work in the game industry, and I know more about what it takes to actually have a company. I put together a basic agenda. Is it a good idea to start a company? Then some things about, I focus on the pure mechanics of having a company. If that's what you want to do, Dan will talk more about what it takes to work in the game industry. Any questions so far? Are there particular things you guys want to know more about so we can focus on them or not? Are you just here to hear what we have to say?
We're here to absorb.
Okay. So first thing, is starting a company a good idea? There are some interesting statistics which actually look a lot better than they really are. After 1 year, 80% of new businesses still exist. 2 years, 70%, 5 years, only half of them. Now, this is a survival rate. We go back and said, I've worked for 1 company that was successful and 3 that were failures. One of those failures still exists in some form today. But no one that was there when I worked there, none of the people that own the company are still there. While the company still exists, it's not the same company. Some of the other ones survived for a while until they went through, they got acquired, they didn't go bankrupt, but it was almost the same thing. So even though they made it through 2, 3, 4, 5 years, they were not financial successes. The people that worked, the people that started them didn't really get a lot of money out of them. People that worked there, didn't really have jobs.
I think that statistic is whether it is still like a legal entity after it, which does not mean that the company is de facto doing anything. So you'd have to figure probably another half of those are actual real.
From a VC, like an investor standpoint, they look at 1 out of 10 companies that they invest in will be a big success, as in pay out more than they got for investment. A couple more will break even, and the rest they'll lose money on. So if you're thinking starting a game company is a good way to make lots and lots of money, no. There's a joke of what's a good way to make a small fortune doing something. The best way is to start with a large fortune. Now, that's just on, if you start a company, will it still be around? Is it right for you? Running a company is a lot of work, a lot of time, and not necessarily a lot of immediate rewards. When I worked for startups, early years, it was not a 40-hour work week. It was 60 hours, 80 hours. It's nights, it's weekends. If you have a family, you have family, you have spouse, children, are they ready to not talk to you and not see you for the next few years while you get this going? So you'll have plenty of new challenges. Hopefully you're all familiar with building games. The joke at Oxide is I'm the person that doesn't know how to make games, but I make sure everyone gets paid. And then plenty of spare time. The one good thing is there's a lot of help. Most people don't actually make use of it. The U.S. has a small business association administration. Most local and state governments have small business agencies to help companies get started, to give you legal advice, help you out, find office space, and there's also incubator programs. The more work you do to find help, the more likely you are to get help. So that's a little bit about that. Any questions so far? So next we're going to talk about, you're actually going to, one other thing to think about is how are you paying for starting this company? You're not going to go find someone that says, hey, you go to, it's like, hey, I'm starting a company, give me money. It is unlikely to happen. The best way to get money for someone to start a company is to have successfully started a company that someone else bought and you showed a return on. If you've done that, you probably don't need to talk to us about how to run a company. So having a source of income that will keep you going for a little while you get going is important. Yes, I wrote. I did write up a lot of things from a structural standpoint that we will post that'll make available to you. It is an early draft of the document. I'll give you that information in a little bit. So one of the things you want to think about. So who in here is actually actively thinking about starting a company in the next year? How many of you have a group of friends that are planning to start it with you? So you're ahead of the game. Starting a company by yourself is hard. So you have the idea of a founding team. These are the group of people that comes together, forms a company. Oxide had a group of 4 people that had all worked together for many years before, knew how to work with each other. They had complementary skills, so they could each do different little parts. They didn't necessarily know much about running a business at the beginning, but did have a partner that helped them out a fair amount in the first 4 or 5 years with that. But that goes to the personality fit. They already knew each other. They knew they could work together. Think about the personality fit. How good is it going to be to work with these people when things aren't going well? When you're going, it's like, hey, we got all these bills. Where are we getting money to pay for them? Hey, can you take out a second mortgage on your house to cover these bills? Your parents give you some money. What do we want to do? Because things are not always going to go well. Diversity of skills. If you're all game programmers, you might want to think about starting one, hey, let's have a designer, let's have an artist, let's flesh that skill set out. If you have a friend that is more of a business person, hey, they know business, they want to be a business person and run a company, might be a good person to have on hand. You're going to need to be able to commit financially. Even if you're not putting up your own money, you might not be getting paid for a while. And then temporally, you're going to have to put a lot of time into it. And one thing that doesn't always get covered is areas of responsibility. How many people here have built and shipped a game before? How many of you have written a game or are working on a game? So I think so far you're probably the best qualified out of the entire bunch for going into the game industry. If you want to start your own game studio, my first suggestion is go work for a game studio, learn how games are built from end to end, from design to ship, and understand that process, because you're going to be responsible for all of it, in addition to learning how to run a company. But in thinking about running a company, you're going to have to do lots of things. There's HR, legal, finance, business development, all these other little things that if you're working for a studio, you know they're there, but you probably haven't paid a lot of attention to. Think about it with this founding team. Who's going to do what? Oxide, a whole lot of that work went to one person. He said, hey, I'm going to do this, and he focused on it. As it grew, he got very miserable doing that and not building a game, which is why I came in and took that from him so he could be happy and build a game again, because, well, he knows how to build a game and I don't, and I was available. Another thing you want to think about, This is starting to get into the weeds of forming a company. What do you want to be? There's lots of options. And you see lots of options here. I'm going to tell you there's really only two options. You want to pick an LLC or a C corporation. You get into the things you want to think about, how many owners there are. So owners are people that have given you money so you can start a game, or they're the founders that say, hey, we're giving our time to start a game. Your liability protection. So things with the number of owners. So sole proprietorship, you can have one. Partnership, you must have at least two. LLC, you can have as many as or few as you want. S corporations have some limits, and owners can only be individuals and must be U.S. Citizens or U.S. legal residents. C corporations can be owned by anyone, so you'd only pick LLC or C corp. Liability protections, sole proprietorships and partnerships don't offer any. If you do something bad in your company, you are responsible. They can cut, so if you do something bad, someone sues you, they're suing you, not the company. Taxation. A lot of things come down to how do taxes get paid. Sole proprietorships and partnerships, you pay the taxes off of your individual tax return. S corps also pass through to individual tax returns. C corps are their own entities, get taxed by themselves, and you'll hear the double taxation if you want to talk, which is its own interesting thing for finances, which we probably don't want to get into right now. And LLCs can pick to be taxed like a partnership or a C corp. The other things to consider is financing. Where's the money coming from? If you want to get investor funding, most of them are going to be most comfortable with a C corp. And then the structural complexity, which is why people don't pick a C corporation, is they have the most overhead for legal requirements for annual review, annual reports and annual meetings and a board of directors and things you file. LLCs have a lot less. They're very flexible, and S corps and partnerships can have as little or as much as you want. So far, you found the people you want to go. You're going to make it. You know what you're going to do. Now you get to make it happen. And this is just putting on paper that I have a company. First thing to think about is you get to leave your job. If someone's been paying you for a while, giving you benefits, it's a scary thing. One thing to think about is take a look at the employment agreement. Most companies have one. It will talk about all sorts of things, such as non-compete, non-solicit, and
Actually, it's non-compete, non-solicit, and IP ownership.
Yeah, and IP
so
ownership.
I'll chime in here a little bit because this is important. The best way to start a game company is to work at another game company first for a while. And as much as people want to not hear that, but like you'll learn a lot. But what is typical in the game industry is that the game industry will have two things to really look out for. One is that in the contracts typically will be an IP assignment that says something like, hey, anything you ever think about ever is ours, while you are working for us. And the second one is a non-compete clause. It says you will not compete with us. Now, what I'm going to say here is that probably what is in the contract is, depending on the state that you live in, is probably bullshit, because probably they cannot enforce even one of them. So they will say a lot of language like things that you own and you can't compete and all that. But the first thing you do, if you have those in your contract, is before you say, oh my God, I can't do this, consult a lawyer in your state. Because we had similar things in there, and the attorneys will probably tell you something like, yeah, this clause is too broad, it is not enforceable, don't worry about it. But don't assume that. And there's some clauses are, like non-solicitation, which is when you try and hire people from your previous work, probably is enforceable in those states. For a reasonable amount of time, usually it's 12 months. But these are things that if you have that employment contract, get that reviewed by an attorney to figure out exactly, don't take it verbatim. Some of those clauses are not going to be legitimate. But one thing you can be very careful about is, say you had an amazing game idea. This is something that is hard to kind of stomach. Say you had an amazing game idea and you're working at a game company and you're going to create, Super B Apple space opera, something, I don't know. And you have this great idea and you're like, I think this game should be made. And your gut instinct is to go in to your management or your company that you're working for and pitch this to them and create a slide deck and all of these things. And this is the hard thing is you may not want to do that, because if you do that, and now there's documentation of you doing this, they will probably own this and argue that this idea is their property, and you will never be able to make this game. Or if you do make this game, there's always going to be this risk, if someone can document it, that in fact that you worked on that game while you're there. So you need to be very careful. If you have some game pitch of working on a project, you may not want to work on it on company time or equipment and not propose it or tell them about it, because if you do that, there can be IP ownership issues. It's best if you think at all that there's no chance of them actually making the game, because the odds are of you pitching in most studios, the odds of you pitching a game internally and it getting made are not 0%, but probably less than 1%. It's extremely unlikely from my experience. You might just hold on to it, document it, keep it in your back pocket, work on it your own time, but not make sure you're not working on company time, and don't present it, and just hold on to that.
Yeah. If you do make the mistake of presenting it and pitching it, they say, no, we don't want to make it. Then you say, it's like, well, I would really like to make this. How do I get the rights to this idea? And if they really don't think it's worth anything, they may just say, yes, you can have them. But get it in writing. It says, this note, you can take this with you. There's an interesting story of, I think it was at Chevrolet, GM. There was a guy that came up with this idea for this new passenger vehicle that you might know now of as the minivan. They said, no, that has no value at all. He said, can I take the concepts with me? They said, yes. He went to Chrysler. Chrysler made the first minivan. And now there's minivans. There were minivans then everywhere. So it is possible, if you have an idea and pitch it to your management and they say no, then you can say, hey, can I take it with me? And then Dan was saying, the one that's most enforceable is the non-solicits, or a non-poaching clause. It says you can't try and get your company's customers, clients, or employees that you've met through working for that company, usually for 12 months. Enforceability of that varies state by state, and something we'll reiterate. We are not lawyers, we are not accountants. Get professional advice. If you can't afford a lawyer, think about not starting a game company until you can afford to pay lawyer fees. Because you're going to want them for filing the paperwork, you're going to want them for a lot of things.
Yeah, you need the employment contract. I'll get into a few more things too in order, but the IP ownership and you need to spend probably costs about $1,000 to have a lawyer look through that, but you want to spend that and make sure that there's nothing in there, because often there's really simple things that you can do. Like say you did a game pitch. Well, one of the simple things to do is, I actually don't think that any modern publisher will ever give you the rights to anything ever, even asking nicely, because there's been too many examples. But what you can do are simple precautions, like, well, if you pitched an idea and you called it, Boogeyman's from Outer Space and Pluto, at least don't call your game that's almost the same mechanic the same name. Simple things, so that it's not really so clear that it's the same game. So you want to be very careful about that. But do consult with an attorney.
Consult with an attorney, consult with a tax accountant, because they'll tell you what this is going to do to your own taxes. One thing I didn't mention, if you do an LLC, if you do a sole proprietorship, partnership, or LLC, and probably an S-Corp, your personal taxes just got a lot more complicated. And if you pay anyone to do them, they just got a lot more expensive.
Oh, and another really, really important caveat. All right, say you are working at a company and you've written source code, or you've written take art or something, but especially source code, or any code you've written, do not take any of it with you. Because even if one line of code gets into your product, just one line, it can contaminate it. It's like a virus. So you want to not even, best advice is not even have a copy of it. There's not even possibility of you. Now, granted, there might be some code that looks like things that you've done, but that's okay, because copyright only covers the original source. If you create it independently, again, that's not covered. But man, do not take anything with you.
Anything, when you work for someone, anything you create for them is theirs. If Dan gets a patent done, which is another thing we'll talk about for intellectual property, his name's on the patent, but all the rights for it belong to Oxide. So you can't take any of that stuff you built with you. Another thing when you're leaving, be polite when you leave. Tell them why you're leaving. But be polite because, again, in a year from now, you might be going back and saying, hey, yeah, that didn't work out. Will you hire me back? And if you'd go and dance a jig on your boss's desk on the way out, probably won't gain you any points when you want to come back.
Yeah, that goes out saying. Be polite, always be polite.
Right? And things like that would work around in the industry, even if you don't want to go back to where you were. So talk a little bit about business plan and finances. I'll probably go a little bit into detail in finances because it's one place that a lot of things fall apart because people don't think about how expensive stuff is. But first we'll talk a little bit about a business plan. And it's a very short thing. A business plan, very similar to a game design document. It's a roadmap to tell you what you're building and how it's going to run. It's as detailed as you need for the audience that it's going to. If you're not getting outside investment, this is just you and the other founders. This is what you're writing down. This is how we think we're going to do this. And in as much detail as you want. If you're going to outside investors, it's going to get a lot more detailed. And I would find someone that you know, again, let's say find advice, that has started a company to read through it and give you advice. Find a mentor. There are a lot of people out there. Find it through a business association. Find it through your network. Find a mentor that's gone through the process that can help you out. You can say, hey, I got to do this. I came into Oxide. I'm managing HR. I haven't done HR before. But I have a good relationship with some of my old HR people. This is like, if you have any questions, give me a call, let me know. And we'll go to lunch, we'll sit down over drinks, I'll tell you what you need to do. But there are people out there that have done it. So even something you haven't done, you're not inventing something new for running a business. Someone can tell you how to do it. Things that you want to have in your business plan, what are you going to be doing? You're saying, hey, we're making a mobile game that we're going to release for free and we're going to make money on microtransactions. Probably pretty important, who's going to be involved? How are you paying for this? John's like, okay, I have Aunt Carol is paying for everything because she loves me, and every time I ask, she'll give me money, which kind of turns her into an owner, so be careful there. And then details of the project. How long is it going to take? Oh, it's going to take 6 months to build this. It's going to take 4 years. How do you know that? Well, you've built a game before with a team, hopefully of a similar scale and genre and platform for what you're talking about doing. If you have built Android games all your life, going and saying, I'm going to make a AAA Xbox game with my company, might be a bit of a stretch. Get a job working on the AAA console game. And then, how much money do you think it's going to generate? And this is not just a wild guess. You want to do some research and say, hey, well, I think based on other comparables, we can get this many games out there, we'll get this many microtransactions, and this is how much money it will generate, and when will it generate it? Because it's not generating when you start the company. It will generate sometime after you ship, and that'll get important when we talk about finances. And like I said, the format and detail will depend on who you're sending it to. Before I get into things, finance, there's some interesting finance terms, and this is where math and some odd thinking comes into, and the IRS gets very involved. There's two types of accounting you can do. There's cash basis and accrual. Cash basis is very much like the money in my wallet. When I get cash, I record I got cash. When I spend cash, I record I spent cash. Nice, easy, don't use it. There's limitations on the type of company, and if you ever think you're going to get over $5 million a year in revenue, you're not allowed to use it. Accrual basis is very different. So let's say I buy a car from Dan. Say, Dan, sell me your car. I'll give you $5 for it. He says, okay, we sign a bill of sale. But I don't give him any money. He records that he earned $5. I record that I spent $5 because that's accrual basis, when the actual transaction happened. And then sometime later I pay him, and that's just cash flow analysis, and it doesn't really matter. All big companies use accrual basis.
Except be careful. This is the negative side about accrual. You can be in a situation where you are making a game, and in the process of making this game, you're being funded by a publisher, and they're giving you a lot of money, and as part of the money, you have to hire people, and you have to buy equipment. Maybe you need hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment, and you're not really making any money on the development because you're doing everything at cost. Well, you buy a couple $100,000 of equipment, but you don't have any cash, and you've paid all your employees. You don't have any money left, but you're feeling pretty good. Well, the government's going to come in and say, you have $200,000 of equipment. That is an asset. And now you owe us taxes on this, even though you don't have the cash on it. So you need to really make sure that you don't get into a situation. And you can be in a further situation, which is even more frustrating, whereas the publisher owes you money. You have a 60-day accrual, and they owe you like a lot of money. The moment it gets invoiced, you submit the invoice. That money on accrual base is your money, technically, because it's a loan out to you, even though you don't have the cash. And what can occur is you may have a tax bill on money that is not in your bank account. So make sure that you are addressing that.
And there's two things. One, there the equipment. So when you buy equipment, so I buy $100,000 of machinery, and tax laws change all the time, and there's all sorts of weird little rules to loop around for like Section 179 exemptions. Have a good tax accountant. They can make things a whole lot easier for you. And talk to them regularly. Do reviews. I buy equipment. I pay $100,000 for that. Well, only it's now depreciated over 5 years. And then on a special rule, so okay, only $20,000 of it's depreciable, but only half of that is depreciable in the first year. So that's only a $10,000 expense, even though I spent $100,000. Then you have the wonderful states that say, hey, you're a business, you have property, you have to pay taxes on the value of your property. So every year, being a Maryland company, we get to give the state of Maryland, first we pay them $300 for the privilege
of being
of filing paperwork to tell them what assets we have, so then they can tell us how much taxes we have to pay for the assets we own that we paid for, even though we paid sales tax when we bought them as well.
So yeah, I think it's 1%. I don't know what but every state has it, and it's easy to not know that. And states get fussy when you don't pay the taxes. So I think in Maryland, it's like 1% of all the equipment that you owe a tax bill. And it's actually not that much money, but it's a pain to actually figure out what you even own and keep an inventory of it.
And plenty of businesses have gone bankrupt because they didn't have money to pay taxes.
Yeah.
So even if you're making money, you want to hold money back for taxes. Another thing, Dan was talking about the contracts. Having your accountants look at the contracts is important. If I'm getting pre-funded by a publisher, and the payments are documented as an advance on future royalties, it's not revenue because I haven't earned it.
Yeah, there's a lot of tricks you can do to try and avoid it, but you need to do it up front, because if you accidentally file or declare something the wrong way in a contract, you can end up with this nasty surprise for taxes. And yeah, you just need to really be careful about it.
At some point, if you make money, you're going to pay the taxes. So and you're all going into business to make money. The taxes are going to get paid. Account for it. So revenue versus cash flow. Revenue says, hey, I've earned money. Cash flow says someone actually gave me the money. So hey, I'm providing a service contract to this company. Oh, it's $10,000 per month. I send them an invoice. That's revenue. Once they pay me, that's cash flow. If they never pay me, it's still revenue, and at some point I can write it off as a bad debt and deduct it as an expense. But there's a possibility I recorded $100,000 in revenue, I owe taxes on it, and I never got paid, so I have to pay the taxes, and then I get the taxes back the next year when I declare it as a bad debt.
So we have a company. It's actually a SaaS company now.
Okay.
So that's why it's great. But we incorporated it as a C corp pretty recently. We got a stipend as part of the settlement.
Okay.
So we're planning on talking to accounting firms, which is broadly, we haven't made any money yet. We did get a $20,000 initial investment as part of the accelerator. But broadly, will I have to pay any taxes on anything this year?
So the $20,000 from Accelerator is an investment in the company. So they have an investment interest. That is paid in capital.
If they got equity in that, then that is not capital. Now,
so it's a safe note. So it'll they'll get equity after.
So it's a convertible bond.
It's a loan.
Okay, it's a convertible bond, which is a good way to get money because it's like
it's a great way to get money.
The reason you use those is so when you get money, say, hey, we're going to give you this. At some point in the future, you're going to get a valuation. and then that will tell us how many shares you have. It's a good way to get initial seed money.
Yeah, convertible bond's a great way to get some seed money. What will happen, we're not tax attorneys, so you want to talk a little bit of taxing, but what will happen if you, and you're probably not paying yourself at that, this is enough to get operations, but if you get more money, when you're a LLC anyway, you would do it differently than in a C Corp. You would do what's called a draw, which is a guaranteed payment, which could get taxed out of that in your personal property. So there's some interesting laws that it's just complicated enough where like you got to talk to an accountant and your eyes will like, what in the world is all this stuff? Because all the state governments are always trying to get a little cut somewhere.
Yeah. So to make sure I have at least a few thousand in the bank because there might possibly be some tax.
I don't think that you're not going to have taxes unless
If you don't make any revenue, if you don't sell anything,
We're still-
then you have no revenue. You may still have to file taxes. You're going to file a loss. The advantage of the corporation is you can carry losses forward for about 5 years.
I mean, what you do, so what you're going to do is it shouldn't take much time because you're not going to make money. Every year, you do tax planning with your accountant. And you go through and you tell them what you think is going to happen. And they'll tell you the right things to do for that year. So you just want to sit down with the accountant and be like, all right, what should we do? In the early days, you're not going to be making a lot of revenue, so it probably won't be a big deal. But there may be things that can bite you later just to make sure. So I would, probably spend an hour with an accountant and just go over what's going to happen.
So, and then if I do take out a little bit for myself so I can pay rent, does that, first of all, is that okay?
Well, it's a question of how...
It's a question of how it's done. We're not accountants, but when you ask your accountant, be like, all right, is C Corp either it's going to be paid... So when you take money out like that, it's going to... The tax is paid on the personal side in some method. If it's income, like you're paid as an employee, which I think you can do as a S Corp. C Corp, you can be an employee. It'll get taxed like a W-2. However, that works. So the company won't pay taxes on it. But the company may have payroll taxes. We'll have to do various things.
You'll have about...
So you want to talk to an accountant or do payroll. Make sure you get those ones.
I think it's like 7...
If you're an LLC, it's a totally different system. It's called a draw, which is sort of like paying yourself, but gets really complicated.
But 1099 is for an independent contractor.
Right, so it should be...
I mean,
Ask an accountant.
If you're materially involved in the company,
Sure.
I mean, I've taken, you're C Corp, you're one of the officers or something in the company, you should probably be paid as an employee, not as a contractor. The 1099 is and we do this with contractors. I get a contractor in, they give me the W-4? No, it's FW-9. I think it's the right form. If I pay them more than $600 a year, I have to submit paperwork.
Not to worry about, get into a big dark hole on this. The truth is just make sure that the reality is that you'll probably screw some up. I guarantee you'll screw some up. Don't worry about it too much. Because if you stress about it, like, oh my God, all these tax things, don't worry about it too much. Because reality is that what the worst thing will happen, especially a relatively small amount of money, that is IRS may come back and say you owe a little bit of money or something, and you'll pay a little fine and you'll be okay. And because I know we've screwed up all these forms technically, and
I appreciate it. Give me anxiety.
Yeah, don't get anxiety about it. Don't get anxiety about it. But just be aware that when you start taking in real amounts of money, especially when you get contracts coming in, and it's actual real amount of money, if you're not planning for it, you can end up with some massive tax bill that you weren't expecting, and you might have been able to avoid. But yeah, don't get obsessed about it, a few $100 here.
And again, talk to a tax accountant, because they'll tell you all sorts of interesting ways to avoid paying taxes.
Yes.
A tax accountant's job is to minimize the amount of taxes you pay legally.
But there is a negative side, not to get to it. So one of the negative things you'll run into is that you got to make a calculated decision on this, because there's a lot of things in Oxide's run into this. That there's a lot of things you do because we don't have to pay taxes into doing it this way, right? It's like, great, we figured out how to not show a profit last year. We're patting ourselves in the back. But then the problem runs into is then you go to as simple as getting a lease, right? And you're trying to show your profit P&L statements from previous years, and they look at you well, you're really not that profitable. We're concerned about this, and you're and you have to sit there and trying to explain. Well, that's because we try not to show a profit because of tax reasons. So there's this tension between banks loaning you money who want to see a profit versus you not wanting to show a profit. You never want to show a profit to the government. So you're gonna want to think about a little bit that you might want to show a little bit of profit, because when you're trying to get a line of credit or something, the banks really, really are not going to loan you money unless you can show several years of profit.
And that's, we know, because recently it was like, we had to sit down and explain, because you go to sign a lease, they're going to ask, hey, we need to see your financial statements and tax returns. Then you get to explain, it's like, yeah, we're in business, we do this much. It's like, well, can you explain these lines? And we have to, well, that's a work in progress deduction for the prepaid royalties, and then this is a corresponding line item entry for the expenses associated with, because we're just moving all, because we're not, we have to pay taxes on it eventually, we're just deferring it to the future.
Yeah, but then, yeah, so you're into,
So yeah,
you have to make a trade-off there. So, and the tax guys won't necessarily know that, but you might just be advised. You might know that I could save a little money here, but I want to show a little bit of profit.
And if you also, if you don't show a profit in a business for 1 out of 5, you should show a profit in the business 1 out of every 5 years, or the IRS starts taking a closer look at you. Which is more word of mouth. It's not an official thing, but that's consensus. Some other things, you have gross income, operating income, net income. I'll look at when I have a profit loss statement on the next page. COGS is cost of goods sold, which we'll talk about. A blend rate is a very confusing one that you'll hit when you get into talking contracts.
Yeah, I'll keep that one separate.
We'll talk about that. Well, we can talk about it a little because there's an easy calculation for what it is, but how you figure out what you need to charge is a whole other science. Then a profit loss statement, which I'll show you in a second, really talks about how money goes. So this is a fictional profit and loss statement. This assumes, hey, you built a game, it took a year, you released it on Android, you had 3 people on staff building it, you paid them an average salary of $100,000 per year, so it can be a nice salary. You also had 20% for payroll taxes and benefits, because about 7.65%, I think, for every $1 you pay someone, the company has to pay that in taxes to the government, in addition to the personal income taxes that you see withheld. You had a variety of other little expenses, and we made $1 million in sales. So you'll see that I had $1 million in sales. My COGS, cost of goods sold, well, Play Store, if you sell something on the Android store, the Apple store, they take 30% of everything off the top. Then, I had some weird widget license thing that I wanted to license, and they said, hey, it's free to use. You just owe us 1% of gross revenue of all sales. So they get $10,000. And there are a number of software out there that you can license that way, which says, hey, okay, well, so your gross income is $690,000. Operating expenses, well, those salaries and benefits were $360,000. We got some pretty cheap lawyers and accountants. Depending on how much you're using and what you're using for, $10,000 is probably a fair number. Rent, hey, you didn't do it in the basement. You actually rented offices. Renting offices is expensive. You didn't actually have everyone you needed in-house to do this, so you spent some money on some outsourcing. And then some hardware and software. You needed to buy some computers. You needed to buy software licenses. You needed Windows 10. You needed Visual Studio, everything else. And just other random expenses. Okay, we needed drinks for the office. We needed coffee. We needed paper. We needed a printer. We had all these other little things. So hey, $138,000 operating income. Take out 35% for taxes. At the end of the day, you had almost $90,000 in profit. This is very fictitious. This is not a budget. This is at the end of the year after you got paid. Thing to remember, you paid that $552,000 up front. You had to find somewhere to get that money to pay for all of that up front. The cost of goods sold actually come in after you're getting paid, so you don't have to worry budget as much for that money. Interesting thing for this, the break even for this is on this budget. If the operating expense, if this part was your budget, you would need $800,000 in sales to break even. And then the blend rate is essentially take your operating expenses, subtract out your outsourcing, divide it by the number of people, divide it per month. It's your average expense per employee per month on the project. This one is $12,000, which is cheap.
Yeah, I'll get it. Two slides talking to publishers.
I have a title slide for you to talk about publishers.
Yeah, so blend rate's going to come into terminology when hopefully you get to the point if you're committed, you talk to a publisher and you're going to get a deal, and they don't like to break costs down these little like buckets of this type of employee, that even there's huge ranges.
They don't want to see it like this. They want to see how much am I paying you per person.
So what they would typically use is called a blend rate, which is like, all right, I've got 10 people for 1 year. That's going to cost, per month. That's going to be 120 man months, and that our man month rate will be $12,000. And then you'll create a contract that's based on that, and that just amortizes all the things like vacation, all these things. No one wants to break it down that carefully, so they think called to create a blend rate. And inevitably, the blend rate that your studio can charge is highly dependent on your ability to negotiate and convince them why you're worth however high you can get that rate. In general, the industry, I've heard of blend rates as low as $8K, and which I think is not reasonable for most positions, and up to, I've heard 20, but that's pretty high. And that's for all positions in the company. So when you're doing these negotiations, that's going to be a major point in negotiating, like where your blend rate is. And I think 12K, 12 around that range is probably relatively in the range of not uncommon blend rates for doing external game publishing contracts. Now, it sounds like a lot of money, but it really is not. Like when you factor in all, you got rent and office space and taxes and all these things, all the various things, ends up being that.
That blend rate didn't cover taxes. That's just operating expenses.
Yeah, well, I mean, that has to cover all your expenses.
Yeah, but it covers, it has to cover all of your, if you're doing the contract, it covers all your expenses. It's how you negotiate the contracts, how they pay you out. If you say, typical contract, well, we're starting the contract here with 4 people, we're going to ramp up, we're going to have 10. And we're going to do a blend rate of 12,000. So you'll say, month 1 I have 4, month 2 I have 4, then I have 5 for 2 months, and then 6 for 2 months, then I have 7, 8, 9, 10. And then they'll amortize out, okay, well, how much is it each month based on that blend rate times the number of people you have on the project?
So we'll get into how pitches look and all that, but inevitably the budget's an important thing, and the really dangerous thing to do, and unfortunately publishers can be very predatory, is to underestimate your actual expenses. Because it's one thing when it's just you and a couple friends in your basement and you don't have a lot of expenses. When you start hiring employees, if you think that the costs that you have when you're small are going to be the same when you get big, you're going to be sorely hurting. When the publisher agrees to this rate and you find out, wow, there's a lot of payroll taxes and office rent and computer equipment and software I had to buy, and I can't actually really run on this profit because I'll hold you to that rate. So, I mean, very, very, I like to say that before you, obviously try and get that rate as high as possible, but before you quote people a price on something, especially if people are coming in and you have a demo and you're pitching it, get a really good understanding of what your costs actually are going to be. And the only way to really know it is to run yourself for long enough to see what your costs are going to be. And as long as you and make your first negotiation position, like coming in, and that's why I'm sort of giving you a range of numbers that the publisher wouldn't, if you came in and said 12K as a starting position, the publisher's not going to laugh at you. That's not an unusual rate. So don't be afraid to ask for it. The worst thing they'll do is they'll come back and say, oh, that's too high, can they negotiate it down? Right? But you don't know, they may accept it. And then if they accept it right away, you'll be like, shit, I should have asked for more, right? And that's just classic negotiation. But you don't want to just quote some crazy number and then they'll think that you know what you're doing. And you never want them to not think you know what you're doing. You're always supposed to pretend that you know more about what you're doing than you are, like in every situation.
So the question is, where do you come up with the number? Is you want to create a budget. And I'm not going to go into a lot of details of creating a budget. When Oxide started, we sat down for a better part of a day, talking about numbers, put a budget together, and said, okay, yeah, we think that actually looks right. But create a budget that covers your project, your planned project timeline, plus at least 6 months. Your level of detail is going to vary. For the next 12 months, you probably want to know how much you're spending per month. For years 2 through 4, look at quarterly. Beyond years 4, you can just estimate annual. And often when you get there, you say, it's like, okay, well, year 5, and this assumes, hey, you're really looking long term. Year 5 is going to be year 4 plus X%, and then it's X% extra per year. And then after you've created a budget, you actually start operating. compare what you're actually spending against the budget, see if you're above or under. If you're above, figure out why. If you're under, figure out why. If you're under on payroll because you didn't hire a position yet, okay, well, that's fine. But if you had hired that position and then you're over budget, well, then you're spending too much. And another important thing is you're looking at budget from a revenue standpoint. Your taxes are revenue. Look at a budget from cash flow. How much money is actually there? It doesn't matter if you have revenue of $1 million if you only have cash of 50. Because I can't pay people with money I don't have. And it's really not fun to tell people, hey, I don't have money to make payroll. Now we'll talk about, you formed your company, you have the founders, figured out finances. You might need more people than just the founders to start this. So building and managing a team is a whole nother area of expertise. How many people here have been a manager? And how many people have been very active in working with recruiters for finding the team and budgeting how much to pay them and looking at salary comps and figuring out benefits and what people expect for benefits? There's all sorts of... So one thing to think about when you're building a team, it doesn't all have to be employees. Employees are great, have their benefits. You can also look at contractors. You can also look at outsourcing firms. There's pros and cons of each of these. Employees, these are people that are building the company with you. They're invested. You have most control over how they work. They're contributing. As founders, you're starting to create this thing called a company culture. How do we work? How do we behave? Some companies out there have gotten a culture of, hey, we're always in crunch mode. We work 60 hours a week all the time. That would not be a healthy culture. Oxide, we've tried to build and maintain a culture of collaboration across disciplines, where people come together to solve problems and interact socially at work as well as just doing work. Because you want to have a culture people like. They're also going to help build value. If you look at building a company, there's a value that investors apply to the number of employees you have. They look at, you have X number of employees, okay, that's worth this much per employee. If you go to get investment money later on, the more employees you have, the more value they're going to assign to you. Typically, they're the most cost effective. Cons, you're making a long-term investment. This is someone who's now, their livelihood is attached to you. If you can't make payroll, it's not just you on the line not paying rent, it's everyone that works for you not paying rent. Hiring and managing is non-trivial, and I'll talk some about hiring, which is a very tricky thing. You get to provide them with all the space, equipment, and tools they need. They're going to want benefits and training. You'll have some specific legal obligations, and the big one that's a caution is a bad hire can be poison to a company. They're hard to get rid of, and they may do a lot of damage along the way. Independent contractors. Hey, these are people, hey, I know this person, they do great work, and I want to bring them in, but I'm not going to bring them as a full-time employee because, hey, I don't have full-time work for them, or, hey, it's just temporary. I'll say for Oxide, we use full-time employees, outside contractors, and outsourcing, all depending on need. One advantage of contractors, you can have contractors that pay per work unit. If they're creating models for you, they can say, you're getting paid for this model. I do not care how long it takes you to make that, you're getting paid for that model. You can also pay them hourly. You don't need to give them benefits, but you're paying them enough of a premium to cover their benefits on their own. You can do specialized skills. We needed another senior graphics person. They're hard to find. There's not a lot out there. We found one that was willing to contract part-time. And contractors, unlike employees, if they're a problem, you can get rid of them pretty easily. Cons, you're only getting finished goods. They're more expensive. They're not as invested. They're not contributing to your cultures and values. It's not particularly good for getting junior people that need training and hand-holding. You're going to get senior people with contractors. If you get a contractor, well, they might be providing you programming services, and they might be providing a competitor programming services. There's different management techniques, and there's some legal concerns of treating contractors like employees. If you hire someone as a contractor, that works the same as an employee. You might have to treat them as an employee and provide them benefits and everything else. Outsourcing is similar to contractors, but in this case, you're working with a firm. They may be cheaper they're probably cheaper than contractors. Could be cheaper than FTEs, especially if you start working with overseas outsourcing companies, which is a whole nother area of managing someone that's not around you and managing someone that's 12 hours time shifted from you. There's great cost savings in using overseas. There are significant management headaches.
I will say that any game studio that's founded now, a substantial amount of, especially art budget, is going to be outsourced. I mean, we have in-house stuff too, but that's just the reality of the industry. Substantial amount is overseas stuff.
So advantage compared to contractors, they can scale up because they have staff that they can recruit staff and add. They can use less experienced talent because they have senior talent to help them along. And often someone will do a large range of services. So I can do modeling, I can do animation, and I can do rigging, I can do all of these things. Versus a contractor will probably do one thing really well. Disadvantages, you probably have no idea, no relationship with the people actually doing the work, or levels of direction. You're not going to get that. Or even with a contractor, you're going to build a working relationship.
And I would say the biggest thing when you're outsourcing is just that, like, if you're not prepared to manage it, like, outsourcers aren't going to, there's a round trip time and how you innovate, so you better know exactly what you want. Like, like I need a steam engine or something, and I know exactly what I want. Great, you can get it done really cheaply. If you're not sure it is what you want to experiment, it's a very difficult resource to use now.
Outsourcers shouldn't experiment. If you're using, so let's take art. So Oxide, we use art outsourcing. We maintain an in-house art team that provides benchmark assets and provides details of what we need to do and goes through the stuff. Sometimes they fix it up, but they can review the work and send it back. But we have to be very specific on what we want. If I tell them I want a steam engine, and that's the extent of what we have, I need a model for a steam engine. I have no idea what I'm getting. I need a model for a steam engine based on this piece of concept art, and I need it to be at this scale, with this number of polygons, in this format, is the type of detail you're going to have to give to them. So even with art outsourcing, you're going to need someone to know what to tell them to do.
And I will say that one of the most common creations of a game company, like most game companies, smaller studios, are actually founded as outsourcing services. So what you'll do is you'll found your company, and it's actually really hard founding a game company to get a game contract right away. I mean, I would say the odds are pretty low. But say you and your buddies, you've done a lot of art and you've done a lot of like basic game programming, various things. You're pretty good at it. What these big games especially often just need so many people, hundreds of people or thousands of people, that a lot of companies get started by doing outsourcing for other studios. So they'll pay you some sort of contractual flat fee to do work for them. So it's actually a good way to consider easing your way into it. The problem with it is that you can run into this loop when I see these all the time in the industry, where you have a studio that all it ends up ever doing is outsourcing to other people, and you never quite get that break because you keep trying to make your own game, but you're always spending your time just outsourcing to other ones, and you can get in this kind of pattern where you never break out of it, and that's not uncommon. The other negative thing about being an outsourcing company, if you're on the receiving side, is that some of the contracts are rather harsh, and you may not get credit for the work that you've done. So sometimes it's changing, but that's been the case in the past where maybe you work on, a really big franchise that's super big, but you didn't actually allow to even get your credit for it or tell people you work on it. So if you're going to do that, make sure that you're aware of getting credit when credit's due.
Now at Oxide, we said we use all three. We pick employees when, hey, it's someone essential to the project. We know that it's work that we're going to need full-time. We can find someone with the skill set, which is a whole other challenge. And we believe we're going to be able to keep this person beyond just this current project, that we're going to keep them long-term. We don't want to hire people for a project we're working on that we're staffing up and know at the end of the project we're letting them go. That's not what we're trying to do, and that's just part of our company culture and values that we're trying to build. Because I don't want to be the person that has to lay anyone off, and that would have to be my job. Contractors we pick up when we can't find the skills or it's short term, and outsourcing we use because hey, we need a lot of work done. We have a specific schedule, and it's production line type stuff. So you know now, okay, you know what you want, so recruiting. You know, what do you need? So skills, timing, and budget. So what talent, what skills do you need? I need a 3D graphics programmer that can work in Vulkan and DirectX 12 and has 5 years of experience and no C++. Timing. I needed them last week. Budget. Hey, Dan, I have $60,000. That won't fit in with what we just talked about doing. So you got to pick all three and be realistic. There are sites out there to figure out what is an average salary range. Then finding candidates. Where do you find them? Your professional network is the most important thing. You're all here at a game conference. Part of being here is building that network, meeting people, talking to people that you may want to work with at some point in the future. Local talent pool is something else to consider. How big is the talent pool? If I'm in, middle of nowhere, there are no game studios around, there is no local talent pool for me to pull from. It is difficult and expensive to convince people to relocate to where you are. You need to relocate someone to fill a role. You're going to end up paying a premium, both in salary and in sign-on bonus to encourage them to move, because they're taking two risks. One, going to a new area, and two, going with a new company. And then another thing to think about is advertising positions. If no one knows you're hiring, which Oxide is, so if you decide you don't want to start a company and you're just looking for getting some experience, there's several of us around here. Come talk to us.
We have a booth on Sunday, too.
We have a booth all week.
All week?
I think, somewhere. And there's several panels that people are on as well. But where's Oxide hires? Oxide hires come from. 85% of the people we've hired have come out of the network. 50% of those were previous coworkers, someone we had worked with before, and we had gotten there past any non-solicit expiration times. Another 15% of people came from referral. Someone said, hey, this is someone you should talk to. I think they're really talented. Another 15% were just people that we knew through the industry and had talked to but never worked with before. 5% is family. And then only 10% came from just advertising positions out there. So now, over time, advertising will probably pick up a bit more, but the best hires you will get will be people that you have worked with before, or people that are employees that are referring other people they know.
Yeah, known quantities are definitely the bread and butter in the early days.
So the next slide is a bit of an eye chart, but it is an example recruiting process. This is what I've put together based on other places. It is something when you're recruiting, you want to have a process down. You want to know how you're doing it. It will make things flow. We actually wrote up a flow chart and said, this is how it works. We go through a resume review. So I advertise jobs, I get resumes come in, they go to the lead for the discipline that needs that talent. They look through the resumes and say, hey, these ones look good. Give them back to me. I'm acting as a recruiter. I call them. Before that, I have talked with those leads. I've come up with, hey, these are some questions you want answered. And I talked to them about the company. I talked to them about the position. I talked to them about how much they currently make, where they are, why they want to leave, all these general questions, and about the position. And I type everything down into notes, which then goes back to that lead, so they can see, okay, let's see how they answer those questions. It saves a lot of time on our leads. So we were hiring a design candidate. We had 300 to 400 applications for a junior designer. I talked to 30 to 40 of them for an hour each on the phone. A small subset of those I felt were good enough then that we did a candidate eval. You see these for art, I've seen these for software development, I've seen these for design. It's a problem to get them to do some actual work so you can have an idea of how they think. If you're using a candidate eval for a position, send it to everyone you're recruiting for that position. Be consistent in your hiring process. It'll save you some legal headaches later in case you're not. They did a good candidate eval. If they're a remote employee, we do a phone interview. Again, with that hiring lead, plus a couple of interviewers off the team. They do well there. Then you bring them on site. They talk to more people. After they've done that on site, what we do at Oxide is everyone that talked to them comes together. We go into a room. We all do it blind. It's like, okay, 1, 2, 3. Give me a thumbs up, thumbs down. So everyone says, this is where I think, and then we talk about it. we are very picky. If there are thumbs downs that we do not address, then we don't go with them. Because it's like, okay, well, we want someone that's going to we're working with this person. We're going to work with them 8 hours a day or more, 5 days a week. We'll be spending just as much time with this person or more than we do with our own family. We need people we can work with. If there are concerns, they need to be addressed or we don't hire. Assuming that goes well, then there's the fun of making the offer. People that have managed people before, done hiring, did you have to make offers to employees or did your recruiter do it for you? I had the advantage, my previous boss insisted that the hiring manager make the offer and make the call and talk to the person. So I have done that a lot. It is not an easy conversation because you're talking about money. I will say, I have talked to them with an idea of where they're looking for, and if that doesn't match up with what we have for budget, we often don't proceed. But you're negotiating money. If you're not comfortable negotiating money with someone, find someone in the founding team that is, and they're going to need to do it. Now, you'll notice here, I have one recruiter at the company that's focusing on the recruiting tasks. Don't everyone do it individually. Then you made the offer, they accepted, they're going to onboard, and there's a whole onboarding process for how do you bring someone in? How do you get them up to speed? So now you've hired someone. Now you get to manage. This is about managing team overall. Now we're getting into these less detail in the notes because, well, I've written so much. Something you want to think about, what is the reporting structure? Who reports to who? Early on, you say, hey, it's a flat reporting structure. That's great. When you start hiring people, especially junior people, they're going to want to know who their boss is. They want to know who they report to. The person that is the boss does not need to be the same person that's doing the tasks. Oxide, we tried to keep the pure management very flat. I think I'm the manager of record for all design and engineering people, and we have an art manager who's a manager of record for all the art staff. I do not tell anyone what to do for building a game. We have the leads on the project do that, which is more of a matrix structure. Think about what the reporting structure is. Think about what you've worked with in the past and what you like. And it's okay to change it over time as you grow. 5-person company needs something different from a 50-person company, needs something different from a 500-person company. If you start a company and get to 500 people, make sure to say, hey, point us out and say, hey, they gave me some ideas early on. Company culture, something you always want to think about. What is the culture? So Oxide, we try and be very friendly. We order lunch in and all sit down for lunch every Wednesday. Somehow it always became Indian food. At one point it alternated, but they liked Indian and that's what we ordered.
What do you try not Indian?
You did Chinese a couple of
I
times.
guess I wasn't there for that.
It was more before I got in there. Another thing to think about, career development training, especially with young people, they want to know where they're going. If you bring someone in as a young artist, junior, so they're fresh out of school. We hired a, recently graduated person on the design team. You're not just getting work out of this person. You need to put time into them, to train them, to mentor them, to get them up to speed. That's hands-on training in the office. That is formal training. Send them to conferences. Send them places they can learn, because they're not going to be it's not going to be an entry-level designer forever. We want to build that person up into more and more responsibilities with the goal of, hey, you should be a lead designer at some point in your career. If you're just starting out, you're probably not all starting out as a junior designer. If you think you're going to be a lead designer on a AAA project in 5 years, I think you might want to talk to some people about what that really looks like. Benefits. You start when you're just the founders. You can get away with not having any. Because, well, you're not going to have time for vacation anyway. Hopefully you'll have, maybe you have a spouse that's working and can support you while you're off on this adventure. Says, yes, it's okay, honey. You don't have to make any money for the next 2 years. It's fine. Make sure they really believe it. Make sure they're being honest and not just humoring you. So that their job might have benefits, but eventually you'll need PTO, health care, possibly retirement plans, other benefits. Think about what you get now. Benefit can be as simple as we have free drinks in the office. We have sodas, we have water, we have coffee, we have beer. They're always in the fridge. You can grab one. And then the other skill is people management. Managing tasks and telling people, hey, this is what you need to do technically, and evaluating technical work is easy. managing people when they come in, hey, I don't like sitting next to this person. This person's annoying me. Or, hey, this person is harassing me. Those are things that's a whole new area. Talk to someone that's been in HR before. Build an employee handbook. There are templates out there that say these are acceptable practices. No one writes those from scratch. They just get standard verbatim words. It's like, okay, this section, this section, this section. No, I don't need the must-wear suit and tie dress code. Throw that out. Build it up. Because those have been reviewed by someone with a legal background. But get help, build that, establish that culture. There are entire courses and professions about how to manage people. I would say I'm an adequate people manager. I'm a much better task manager, but I'm an engineer by trade. One more little thing on the structural side before I give it off to Dan to talk about more obtuse and abstract issues is side business or full-time. You don't have to start a business as full-time. If your employment agreement, your current employer says, hey, you can do something on the side in your spare time, perfectly legitimate. You're probably not hiring a lot of full-time employees. You're probably not building a AAA game in your off hours. It's something to consider. If you're thinking about going off, or you're thinking about, hey, I've done parts of a game, maybe I can think and do a company. If you have the flexibility, make a small game on the side so you really understand end-to-end what goes into it. Start slow. You don't have to say, okay, I'm quitting my job, I'm getting VC, and I'm starting big. We're going to hire 50 people next week. Pros and cons. Side business, you're going to go for a lot smaller. Think you're going to go take a lot longer, and you're probably not getting a publisher to finance you. When you start getting people to help you out, if they're doing it, hey, let's build a game. Let's all do this. If someone's helping you out, make sure you understand and agree on what they're getting out of it. If you're saying, hey, will you do these art assets for me? And they think, hey, I'm helping you build this game. It's going to make a lot of money, and you're going to share the profits with me. And you're thinking, hey, I'm going to give you a couple of cases of beer. Have that conversation before it happens, because you don't want to have it'll be uncomfortable later, which actually is something I should talk about for founders. When you're putting the company together, if it's more than just you, think about a couple of cases and write down and have a plan, hopefully you never use it, of what happens when one of the founders fails to contribute to the company. They're not putting in the time and effort that the others are, or one of the founders wants out. They're saying, hey, this has been great. I really can't keep doing this. I know you guys love it. I want out. There's plenty of stories where a company goes, it's like they're starting to get VC funding, and there was one of these founders from 3 years ago that they don't even talk to anymore, and he's no longer in the business. Oh, but he still owns a quarter of it, and they got to negotiate with him. There are ways and structural ways to address that if you're not quite sure. You can have founders vest their own shares in the company over time instead of owning it all at once. Lots of interesting things to do. I'm happy to sit down and talk to someone if you have questions there about some ideas on that. Now I'll let Dan talk more about legal matters, starting with general business. Like, we're going to talk about these.
I'll take over this. All right, so I think going in and getting really grognard into some of the mechanics of things to watch out for, I will say that kind of please back up a step and sort of go over the process of making a game company, because I think a lot of people, because specifically this is just like our background, what happened to Oxide. So I'll tell you a little bit about how Oxide got started. So, Oxide was founded 5.5 years ago from a lot of former Firaxis folks, and we had worked on Civilization 5, so we were the dumplings of that, and we said, hey, we've made a very successful product, made a lot of money for our employer, why don't we take our hand at making our own company? And so we founded a game company with a lot of industry credibility and making a great game. So what typically happens when you're approaching a publisher and trying to go this route, which is the most common approach, is that you're going to first get your buddies who hopefully have some credibility in the game industry, having made at least a few titles before, and some kind of hopefully leadership position, or you work and work on something that's not just like, hey, I was in QA or something. So the first step, I think, in starting your own company is to get yourself into a position with experience. Is going to not only teach you a lot, but it's going to give you a lot of credibility to talk to the publisher. So the way it works is that you're going to come in and you're going to do a pitch, right? And pitches are interesting things, publishers and agents, because the pitch. I can't tell you what's a successful pitch. Like, I have no idea. Like, to this day, who knows why you can convince someone to give you resources or money to make your game idea or maybe your game idea. But I will say, I did have an interesting discussion with our current publisher, and after we went through the process, we pitched something and we got approved, and it was amazing. We were on our way. We're doing great. And I asked him, like, how do you deal with these pitches? Because typically the pitches are given in person. A lot of GDC at E3, there's half-hour pitches. So it's like speed dating. I can't describe it. It's like developers are going publisher to publisher and like speed dating. You only got half an hour because you got so many people that are all trying to do pitches. So these publishers could be doing 100 pitches in a conference or more, and they may take one, for that particular thing. So that's to your expectations at a GDC or E3 that they'll take one pitch of all these pitches. And so I asked him, like, how do you keep all these pitches straight? Because imagine you go and you just saw 100 pitches for a game. And how do you remember what pitch was good and whatnot? And how do you think about, how does this proceed? He said a very interesting thing to me. He said, I don't think about the pitch. He's like, I don't. If you're trying to remember the pitch, you'll never remember anything. It's like I always remember the people who gave the pitch, and this is really fascinating. So what really carries gravitas in going and getting a published contract is not the pitch. It's the people behind it. That's what's going to carry the weight. So that's why it's important. I say work in a game job position. It's going to be a lot easier to get a contract when they look and say, you've worked on these 4 or 5 really successful titles. Your team, you've got a team of people who work on this. That carries a lot of weight. If you don't have that, I think that the reality is that pitching process becomes more complex, because at this point you can't have a slide deck with, hey, here's my idea, give me a game, give me money to make a game. Like, that's just not going to happen. What you would have to do in that situation is you're going to have to make a demo, and the less experience you have, the more awesome your demo and complete your demo is going to have to be. And so when you get to that process, the typical development for a project is not very unusual to go in and get, hey, here's a whole ton of money to make your game, let's go. Normally what happens is a phased development. So normally what occurs, you go and you do a pitch, and they're not going to give you millions of dollars to do a game. They're going to give you a smaller amount of money to do a prototype, a pitch. They'll actually pay you money if they like the initial pitch to further develop your idea. And it may not be a whole lot of money, enough for a few teams for 3 or 4 months, and to pay for it and to contract out various parts so you can put together something, because they don't expect, especially with a lot of professionals, that you're just going to be able to do all this development work for free. You may not necessarily pay for it, and it may be IP that they hold, so like, why would you spend your own money doing IP that inevitably they would own? So you'll often get a small amount of seed money if you're successful, to develop your idea. And from that, there'll be another meeting, and that's probably the most important thing, if you get that first one. And then you get the next one. Now, that doesn't mean they're likely to do a project. I think probably the ratio I'd expect, particular publisher, they might give, for every game they make, there are probably 5 or 6, maybe 5 to 10, these prototype things that they tried with various game studios. Might have been a very small 6-month thing, is typically how it works. And they may have tried 5 or 10 of them, and they'll take one of them. But it's important as your first step that's likely to how it will work. Now, eventually, you'll get into the green lighting, and the green lighting is, okay, now I've got a pitch, and they've given me money to develop it, and I'm going to get it in front of the publisher. And then the big executives come down and they pitch it, and then hopefully you're off to the races at that point. The reality is that as an individual startup studio, it's sort of intimidating to talk to publishers. How do you even know how to get a publisher's attention? So one of the things that you can do, that Oxide has done, is we have an agent. Agents, just like you sound, it's like the guy you always see on TV is going around doing all this stuff. A good agent is super useful, and the way it works is the agent doesn't take money up front. They make money, a percent of royalty off when they sign the deal, percent of the revenue. It's a small percent, so that you're not paying money up front. And then they'll go and they will pitch you in front of all the different people and manage all the relationships. And I would recommend that if you can get a good agent, I think it's a great idea as a small developer. The problem is that, again, going back to this experience thing, that a good agent doesn't just take anybody. I mean, they only have so many clients. And from their perspective, they have a number of clients, and they can end up with clients that compete with each other on the clients can compete with each other. So just because they say, hey, get an agent, be careful about it. There's lots of people who will take your money. A really professional agent probably won't take any money up front, but they will sign an exclusivity clause with you. So, you don't want to just, it's like interviewing a job candidate. You want to be really careful. And it will be a challenge if you don't have experience getting a good agent. But talking to all the publishers by yourself will be problematic.
And to tell you a little bit, so Oxide has an agent. But before we got that agent, we built a game and shipped it. We built a prototype for deck demo, and we were well on the ways on another prototype. Which helped us show, we had something we could show the agent, hey, we have shipped this game as Oxide. Hey, these are the things the people that are here have also built. This is another prototype we built, talked about, and things like, oh, that's really cool. And then this is a current project that we're working on. So,
that's right. Anyway, it sort of works a lot like getting seed funding, except that inevitably they're not getting equity in the company typically, or sometimes that can be the case. They're giving you money for the project. But there's a lot of nuances to doing a deal. For one of the things is that even though that I've talked about blend rate, how you do the contract thing, all contracts through publishers are based on milestones, and then you deliver a milestone that you agree upon, and they pay you. Well, one of the things they have to be very cognizant of the fact is that you have to spend all the money to do the milestone before you get the check. They don't give you money up front to do it. They don't give you, hey, I want $100,000. They don't give you $100,000 to go off and do it up front. You have to do the thing, and then you invoice it, and then they give you the money. The reason why I bring this up is that it's very common to be in a situation where not only once you invoice it, it might be 30 to 60 days before you get paid. So you could literally sign a contract, spend a ton of money, and it may be up to 3 to 4 months before they actually pay you for the thing that you delivered, and they're completely happy with you. And that's just the normal way of doing business. And typically, a lot of upstart game companies, people literally do get a credit line that's backed by their house, and they use all this to pay their payroll before they get paid. But you have to understand that cash flow intimately. In fact, even if the publisher loves you, they say you're amazing. I'm willing to pay money up front. The publisher would love to do that. A lot of finance departments in big companies especially prohibit them for paying money up front for work not delivered. They can't even give you the money if they wanted to. So you have to find a way of funding a short-term loan is sometimes a lot of money before you get paid. And that's just one of the things that I didn't quite understand before we were starting having to juggle that.
And that's that timeline you said is if you deliver the milestone and it's good. There's a whole nother problem if you deliver the milestone and they say, hey, we need X, Y, and Z fixed. So now you have to go spend more time fixing those while working on getting the next milestone done.
So give me an idea of cadence for a typical milestone. Now we're on a 6-week cadence right now, so it'll be a 6-week period, which is probably fairly normal. And we do the work for 6 weeks, and we're paying all the employees, we're paying all the outsourcers, anything that's due, and then we submit the milestone for review. That milestone takes 15 days for a review to come back and say yes.
Or more.
Or more sometimes. It's supposed to be 15, but usually sometimes it's a few days late. And then it's invoiced. And once it's invoiced, it goes to a payment system. And we have something a little different, but the payment system is often what's called net 30 or net 60, which means you don't get paid for another 30 to 60 days, depending on the company, right? A lot of companies do net 60. So you see the situation, you have a 6-week milestone. Oh, that's great. I only have to come up with 6 weeks of cash. No. When they wrote that first check, about 4 months before you got paid for it. So when you're trying to do a game contract, be very aware of that, so you don't get into some kind of cash pinch. So
Yes.
When you're negotiating the milestone payment, you consider that loan interest into there? Is what you need?
No, there's no interest.
no, in fact, so sometimes you'll see in the contract there can be reverse interest, and that is that like typical structural. Now you can negotiate anything depending on how much leverage you have with the publisher. But one terms I saw said it was a net 60. Said we'll pay you within 60 days. If you want it paid immediately, we'll do that, but we'll charge you 3%, which I thought was a little bit shady. But but they will not pay you interest on it.
Well, I meant more of when you're negotiating with them the amount you want, you financially, internally consider, well, we don't have the money up front.
Yeah.
We know we're going to have to get
Oh, if you have to get a loan, yeah, you're gonna have to. I mean, that goes into that cash flow. If you say, hey, I got the money and I need to do that, that's why. So you say one thing you can do is founders. Okay, hey, we're gonna start this. We say you magically have a publisher that's gonna sign you. It's like, okay, we have the 4 founders. We're gonna start. We're gonna get into the first few milestones with just us 4. We're not taking any salary. We're gonna pay all the bills on this thing called Visa and MasterCard. I know people that financed a company with Visa and MasterCard and built up fairly extensive credit card bills and some magic of transferring balances to keep off from paying the interest on them. But people have started that way. I've known people that have. They literally went to the bank, took out a second mortgage on their home to get the cash to start the company, just to provide that initial capital to get it going until money can come in.
So if you get a contract, right, what we often can do is you can get a line of credit that will effectively let you borrow the money to pay it and then getting the invoice. Because one of the things that is sort of annoying and frustrating is that you'll be invoiced, like the money is due to you. So in that point, it's sort of booked, but you may not have the money yet. So that can get a little bit annoying when it's like, technically it's my money, it just hasn't gone through and cleared. But normally when you're a small business and you're trying to get those lines of credit, you're going to have to put something up to back it. So the people may not do a second mortgage, but they'll often use the equity in their house to back a line of credit for their company. So you end up with your own personal property. The bank will probably not take a company, unless you've done a lot of revenue. Even for Oxide, it's hard to get like a huge line of credit based on the company's assets. So you end up having to do a lot of personal things in the early days. So you have to be prepared for even if you get the contract, maybe you have friends or family that can help you with a line of credit. But remember, you're on the hook for that. Like if the payment doesn't happen, you miss a milestone, they don't want to pay you. That the asset is linked to the line of credit.
Yeah, so one of the things Oxide did when they got started was they found someone willing to give them some cash to cover those upfront expenses until revenue could actually start coming in.
And eventually, after 5.5 years running Oxide, we have enough cash reserves. These aren't really issues anymore for us. But these were the kind of, oh wow, I didn't realize that it can be 3 months after you submit work before you actually get paid for it. You don't realize that and realize the implications of trying to juggle money around while you're waiting to get paid.
On the subject of milestones, what are the typical objectives, if you will, that a milestone includes?
Well, okay, it depends on the publisher. Ideally, so every publisher's got their own process in place. So one of the things you have to figure out, you're talking to publishers, and they have their process of how they approve projects, and they go through it. And an ideal process is like you are setting the milestones together, because what they require is accountability for the money that's being spent. So they need to understand that, like, all right, because they may not understand the development of your particular game very well, but what they want is to create an outline of your different milestone goals. So one of the really rookie mistakes is to go in and make a milestone schedule that's just too ambitious, and you can't meet it. And they're going to sit there, and they're not even being assholes or anything. They're like, you said you could, build a level and a fully done level in 2 weeks, and they're like, okay, well, we don't think that's right, but you're saying it, and then it gets in the contract. And with the contract, now you're obligated to it. So you want to be really careful about promising things and milestones that you can't deliver. It's usually easy to get carried away, but inevitably you should be the one setting what's in each milestone. But that's your word though, because if you don't deliver that, then they may not be able to pay you. They may want to pay you. They may have a good reason. They may have a process in place where finance will not let them give you the money unless you actually deliver the goods. So they may be quite binding.
That gets into some project planning that I do when I manage project teams. Is we look at, okay, I'm planning out, I'm telling my boss, this is what we're going to deliver over the next 3 months. I look at the team, I look at, okay, what do I think I do if only everyone works at 80% of capacity, what can we deliver? Which gives me 20% capacity on my team to cover for things we didn't think about, interruptions, and because not everything's going to go the way I want it to. So if you're putting a milestone together and you say, I can meet these milestones and we got to deliver 100% to get there, you're being overambitious. You're at 80%, depending on how much experience and how much you've done, that might still be overambitious. It's the under-promise, over-deliver. You can complete work for future milestones ahead of time. You won't get penalized for that. Now, if you're too cautious, they're going to say, no, that's not enough. You're not getting enough done. You're not showing enough progress. You're overestimating how much it's going to do. So there's a balance between the two of them. And the only way you can figure out how to do those project estimates is having worked on something of similar scale. I can't sit down. When I started Oxide, there's no way I could have sat down and say, this is how long it's going to take for you to do this. For a lot of things, I still can't do it. I'm not involved enough with the work. But if you've been, hey, I've built this type of game before, I was a producer on this game, a senior producer, I saw how everything worked, I managed their schedules, probably has a good idea of how much time it's going to take with specific skills. Only way you can get that estimating is with experience.
The milestone cadence, that does depend a lot, publisher, and ideally you get a nice relationship, but it can get very adversarial in some cases. I've heard of cases where publishers use it to, because remember, the publisher wants to be malicious to you as an upstart. They have enormous leverage. I mean, they can twist your arm in ways that are very unfortunate because they control the money, and they can force you to do things that you don't want to. I mean, Oxy's never had that situation, but you can see how it's the case pretty easily. So hopefully that relationship goes very well. But unfortunately, some publishers do use that to get things out of you. Like they try and squeeze you and get more work out of you.
Another advantage of working with an agent is
they will be able to warn you. Which ones?
This might be your first contract you're negotiating.
Yeah.
The agent, this could be his 100th. He'll know what terms. He's probably worked with that publisher. He knows what they're going to come out for in their first offer and what they'll get to. He can actually help you get a much better agreement than you probably can on your own.
I've heard stories, like I've only worked with a few publishers, but like some people do like every 6 weeks or these complex milestones. Other ones, some of these Japanese guys, I think it's like Nintendo, I heard, just gives you, they're like, well, there's 3 milestones and we'll just give you this big chunk of money in 6 months and because we trust you completely. I don't think that's a super easy deal to sign. But there are a huge range of how publishers work. But inevitably, you're not going to be able to probably change their process. You'll have to go with whatever their process actually is, and it may be, freak show. You don't know. Any other questions on that?
So, you're a side business, a publisher will finance you. Is it possible you could do a deal with a publisher with a not financing the game? If they still publish?
Oh, okay. So yeah, I was sort of coming in the sense of a publisher. Okay. Generally, if you just finding funding somewhere else, a publisher will act as a traditional service, and that's actually probably a relatively easy deal to sign because they're not putting up so much money at risk. But generally, games cost too much where you can't find enough money to do it, or the scale that we're talking about anyway. So they would finance the project.
There's a challenge that the smaller side business games, and even some of the smaller games, is getting attention. It's no longer good enough to build it. You build an excellent game, you might not make any money because it doesn't get out there and it's lost in so much noise with all of the games coming out these days because a lot of the tools have made it very easy to make an average game.
So the I think we were probably talking about is there are, and I'm not familiar with them, there are smaller publishers like boutique publishers who do little smaller things and can aggregate them. Like the board game industry, that's pretty typical that people are doing in the side business. Most people making board games have full-time jobs. They don't make, there's probably a few professionals out there, but most games that you can buy on the shelf are like part-time jobs. a big publisher like thing is probably not going to go with it. One of the things that will show up in almost any real contract, like a sizable thing, is they'll have key man clauses, which are going to require certain people to be spending their full time or certain percent of their time on the contract. They'll almost certainly be in the terms of the contract.
If you have the money to fund the game yourself without a publisher, you have a lot more options. If you looked at that profit and loss statement I showed, it showed 30% going to the Ant Play Store because they're kind of acting as your publisher, because that's kind of self-published. If you self-publish on Steam, I think it's also about 30%. A publisher is probably going to take 30 to 35%. If you self-fund. If they fund it, they're taking a lot more because they took all the risk, so they get more of the reward. So yeah, if you can find someone else that's willing to take it, the answer is whoever's funding your game is going to want a return on their investment, and you're paying it out. Whether that's the publisher's funding it, Aunt Carol's publishing it, or whoever you have, they want a return. We go into the
I don't even know. I'm trying to think. Like we got to introduce our agent
Through
networking. So my first advice when you're going to start a game company is that, like, all right, what should you do? Well, don't rush into it. Go to every conference. Go to Siege. Go to GDC. Those are great conferences. Just start talking to people. Talk to everybody. Build up a network of people. And don't over the time, because you're going to need people to hire. You're going to need people. You're going to from business contacts. You're going to need all these people, and you'll start seeing running into agents, or you'll hear things about it, and you can do the work on it. The early days, I think that if the agent kind of my opinion about it is that there's lots of people out there in the industry who are sort of vultures and will try and take your money and get whatever they can. I would think that any real agent will not take money up front. So if you run into someone who wants you to pay them before they give you a deal, because the good agents, no. They're not going to make money until they make money, which means they're not going to sign you unless they have a lot of faith in you and your team personally. So that's probably one litmus test of knowing if they're going to do a good job. I would not give someone money up front. So if you see that, like, a little dodgy. But yeah, just be in the industry, get to know people. And you don't need an agent. You can definitely talk to publishers directly. It's just the agent is going to tell you lots and lots of information about, like, which publishers don't like paying their bills, which publishers are really good with the contracts, which publishers like cancel projects all the time. Like, they'll know all sorts of things that are super useful. They'll know how to negotiate terms, because one of the things they've seen in these contracts with various people, and they'll know what terms in the contract are negotiable and what aren't, and like what thing the publisher, and they'll have a lot of experience. So it's definitely worth it. You get to the point, and you may find is that you can't get an agent at first, but you start getting a really serious conversation with someone. And then you say, okay, shit, I may need some help to negotiate this. And at that point, like, don't be afraid of finding some representation. They're probably, if you've never done it before, they're probably worth it. Even though they'll get some percent of it, but they should make it up for you. Let me talk, does anyone have questions about that? Or I can talk a little about how the pitching process works if you want. As much as I know.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about what we want to cover. This is a lot about where do you want more information?
I'm kind of curious about the legal documents, like contracts and stuff like that.
Okay.
Honestly.
I can talk. So I'll talk some. So I broke this up into two sections. One is just general business. Find a good lawyer. Find a lawyer. You may need multiple lawyers that do different things. We have one lawyer that does all of our contract stuff. We have another firm that does patents. But there's some general business ones you're going to want. When you form, you're going to get an operating agreement for an LLC or an Articles of Incorporation if you're a C Corp. Find a lawyer that builds those. Have them review it. The contract we're talking here this is really, I'm going to outsource. So we had a lawyer draw up a work for hire contract that we can use. Has a few things to fill out. We paid a fair amount of money, but now I have it. I can use it over and over again.
And make me back up to, like, one thing that going to intellectual property that I've seen people really screw up, and they don't realize it right away, is you do not accept work from your friends or anybody without a contract between them, a right behind the contract. Because that is poison inside your thing. So say you accept a single line of code from a friend, and they put it in your game. You don't know what will happen. You could go to a publisher. So when you go to a publisher or an investment or anything, you go through this process called due diligence, and they're going to look through the IP assignment on every single thing. So as part of the game development contract, you're going to have a section that says, disclose anything that you do not own, right? And you have to list out every single thing that you didn't create and what the license agreement for it is. You're also going to have indemnification says that everything that you develop is actually your property. And if the publisher gets a whiff of any piece of work that's inside your thing that you don't have rights secured to or don't know, they'll probably walk. It's just they do not want to get sued. I mean, people have gotten sued for a lot of money.
And the work for hire contract we have has clauses. It says, by providing this work for us, here's what we're giving you. We have this is what you're getting paid. This is what you're doing. It also says you're assigning all legal, copyrights, all assignments for this work, or you're assigning to Oxide in exchange for contract.
Yeah.
For what we're paying.
And also their employment contract too. I mean, that's a little thing. Just make sure that all that stuff is buttoned up. I have seen some horribly bad things happen in litigation because people didn't have a clear understanding of what was owned and what isn't owned.
And it's another thing is write everything down. Put it in email. A handshake is great for doing something. It's like, but I would not. It's like, okay, yeah, we agree. Shake hands. Okay, we agreed on it. Then you don't have any problems with us putting it down and signing a contract that says the same thing we agreed on. Because now I have something I can show and I have documentation.
Yeah, so go to a couple little things here too that we should do. There's simple precautions. One thing that people don't do, it sounds me, is copyrights. Copyright costs $150, and you can do it online. You don't need a lawyer for it. If you create a work and you get to the point of selling it, register the copyright. The copyright's technically always granted. You create a work as copyrighted, but it's called a common law copyright. That's not a very good copyright. And the problem is that if you don't register it, and the way to register code, I think you submit the first 25 and the last 25 pages code. That's stupid, but that's how it works. And you'll get this little certificate. But if you don't register the copyright, the federal government, you'll have a number of negative things that occur. One is you may have to prove later that you actually own the copyright, and you also may not have standing in federal court to actually litigate, so it's really not a good idea. The other thing is there's also not necessarily clear documentation of what you own. So spend the $150 and register your copyrights, and also make sure you put a notice that it is copyrighted.
We should probably talk about there's 3 things for intellectual property. You have copyrights, patents, and trademarks. And people get these confused.
Yeah. So one
to their detriment.
So I've seen a lot of stuff happen, especially between copyrights and trademarks. And I'm not going to get into too much because that's a whole long discussion. But there's a huge difference between copyrights and trademarks. And a lot of people confuse what can and can't be copyrighted and what can and be trademarked. Trademarks are also worth doing, but trademarks, as a small company, don't get overboard because trademarks, you have to sort of be using it in a real case. But do get clear clarification of what those mean and how valuable they are. And one of the things with trademarks that I do suggest is one of the nice reasons to trademark. Now this wouldn't happen if you're going to publisher, but if you wanted to self-publish, I would definitely want to trademark your game and get it registered with the trademark office, because the problem is that you could be inadvertently violating someone else's trademark. So going back into trademark, one of the curious things about trademarks is like Oxide. Why is it called Oxide? Why is Oxide Games called Oxide Games? Interesting question, right? Well, how did we come up with that name? Well, we came up with we had a list of about 100 names when we were going through the company, and we went down every single name. We had a couple of requirements. We wanted it to be easy to remember, easy to spell, and not have any association with it, so you're not associating with something else. So cool words like, I'm going to call my name, I don't know, epilepsy, something. And like, well, don't call it something that has strong connotations. You want something that has a blank slate as much as possible. But then we went down this list, met all these requirements, and we found Oxide was the first one, or the only one on our list of like 100 things that wasn't trademarked by someone else, that we could actually get the trademark on. So we're like, wait, no one's actually registered? That sounds like a cool game company name, and no one's trademarked it? So we're like, oh, all right, we're trademarking it, and that was literally how we picked the name. So, naming your studio, don't come up with some cool name and get emotionally attached to it. Think about those things about like the fact that you'll want to build your own brand and not have a thing associated with it, and that's something that you can actually trademark, and you're not violating someone else's trademark. So if you submit a trademark, they'll do a search for you and they'll tell you if it's too close to someone else's mark.
For trademarking, you have to actually ship the product.
No.
No, trademark is you're saying, this is a name, image, something that we are using in this way for this industry.
Trademark just don't have to ship a product. You have to document. You have to be doing business with it. So as a game company doing business, you can trademark your name because you're doing business. You can't just cyber squat and just take random names.
It has to actively be used, or it's an abandoned trademark. Or
Yeah, there's some rules to it. But, like, you'd have to talk to an attorney, but your company name is certainly trademarked.
that would be, where you may have multiple attorneys, or you find it, a firm that has people that specialize. Oh, we have people for intellectual
Yeah,
property. we have people for
trademark.
contract law.
Trademark's pretty simple. I mean, unless there's a conflict, but you can actually for free. So you don't have to spend a lot of money on this. This is ways you can save money. You can go to the trademark office and you can just, if you have, I want a name nice to do this. You can type the name in and you can see what other hits you get. And it's okay if there's another hit in another industry because you always trademark in your industry, but you can sort of get an idea if there's like no way that you'll be able to get that trademark. So you don't have to, because that's all the trademark attorney's probably going to do. That's all they'll go through that. But before you go through that, I would go through the trademark and just that's what we were doing. We were just like, all right, type this name in. Oh, well, there's some, Chinese mail order company doing something, ride mail order. Okay, I have a word.
To be fair, the legal company name, public company name is doing business as, do not have to be the same
Yeah, it's
thing.
true. So you don't need to when you article and incorporation are often different names. Like technically we call Oxide Games and Oxide, but the actual legal name is Oxide Interactive LLC. That name is completely different than the name you bring in public. So you don't have to worry about trademarks on that name as much. You're not going to, unless you plan on using that name, but you don't need to use that name. You can do doing business as another name. And you can, and people do all the time.
So yeah, so the company name, if you form the company now and we're not sure what we want to do for the public name of it to be, still form the company and then figure that out, get it out there. But I would do it fairly soon afterwards.
I would say don't get into the kind of new business trap. I see people and they're like, oh, I'm going to make the cool business cards and the cool deck and all this stuff and spend all this time on it because that's what people tell you to do. We didn't do any of that. Like we came up with Oxide. We had Oxide as a name, the name registered, but we didn't have business cards for a while. We had a very basic website for the longest time. All these things because in reality is that you want to be spending your time running your business and getting clients, not creating this virtual presence, because anybody can do that. And nothing looks more fake than going in with this fancy business card of these fancy titles and all this stuff. I mean, the publishers don't care. I barely carry business cards even anymore. Literally, it's sort of a formality because if you're doing business with Asia, that's this whole ritual that you're supposed to have one. But if it weren't for that, I don't even think I'd carry them around anymore. Because I was thinking about it the other day and realizing that in the 15 years I've been doing game development, I don't know if I've ever actually used someone's business card.
From my previous history, I have boxes of business cards that kept getting ordered for me, and I take one out and use it. I give one to my mom because she always wanted one of my new business cards whenever I got one, because that's the way moms are. A couple get used as bookmarks, and the rest would sit in the box, never come out.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, this is sort of outside, but yeah, don't pretend to be something you're not. If you're a small company with a few people, be very honest about where you're at. It's not useful. I mean, obviously sell yourself, but don't sit there and try and pretend it will not come across well if you have all that information, because lots and lots of people are really slick stuff, and publishers are see it all the time. And I think they'd rather have. I mean, this is my opinion about it. I think they'd rather have
Have
honesty.
something. Look professional. Don't overspend time and money on it, because your time and money is best spent actually building up the skills you need to deliver a game. The other legal ones, I mean, these are non-disclosure agreements. Have a lawyer draw one up, because you're going to end up giving that out to a lot of people, because this is a very cagey industry. I came from network security. I thought that was a cagey industry about not talking about things. Games is even less. It's like, yeah, we're working on a game with a person.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you anymore. We're working on a game with a publisher. I'm hiring for it, and I can tell you positions I'm hiring because I got to advertise those, but I can't tell you anything else about it, which makes it interesting for recruiting when you can't tell people what you're trying to hire them for.
Yeah, it gets a little dodgy. So non-disclosure agreements, normally, being a small publisher or a small company, you're going to have to sign, if you're talking to a publisher or something, you're going to have to sign their NDA. Like, they're not going to sign your NDA. Your NDA will be when you want to talk to someone or have a contract or someone talking about your work, then you have your NDA. But normally they're going to make you sign your own. And I mean, sometimes these NDAs get really annoying. Like I was on the phone, it's like 3 weeks ago, an NDA with a long-term partner who we get along great, a long-term partner who's done a lot of stuff with us. And I'm on the phone for half an hour hearing our lawyer and their lawyer argue over 3 words on this NDA. And I'm like, oh my goodness.
Well, remember, we're paying our lawyer per hour to have that conversation. So,
yeah, so it can definitely get a little frustrating, and but yeah, because there's a lot of ass covering, to be blunt. I mean, there's a lot of these legal documents. Oh, that's actually something I should talk about, contracts and stuff. So if you don't have any experience with contracts, when I started, I guess being from an engineering background, I think of a contract as like, that's what people are going to do. Like, make the contract, and like, it says this, and it says that, and then you're going to do your part, and I'll do my part. It says I'm going to deliver this product on this day with these features, you're going to pay me this amount of money on this date, and all that stuff. And I'm like, okay, that's great. That's what's going to happen. That's not how contracts really work in the real world. So the best way to think about a contract, and the reason why I say this is because you can talk yourself out of a deal because you're trying to hammer out the perfect contract, and be careful about your contract, but don't talk yourself out of it, because the contract is really what I call the insurance policy. The truth is that between the two parties, you're going to create a contract that's going to understand the terms, and there's going to be especially these little details. What happens if like an asteroid hits your server on this date right before your deliverable? I mean, there's all sorts of random stuff in the contract. Think of the contract as an insurance policy, and that the day-to-day could deviate substantially from the terms of the contract. But that contract's what you're going to come back to if things go really bad. And you're not going to ever litigate this thing. You're not going to go to a lawyer, and never get into well, I'm going to hire my lawyer or sue you type of thing ever with a publisher or anybody if you can all help it, because the truth is that stuff is so expensive. Talking to a lawyer, even talking to a lawyer, is so expensive that nobody, including them, ever wants to talk to any lawyers. So the contract is really just there if things went really, really bad. But your relationship with them, with your publisher, especially if it's a positive relationship, so that's going to happen all the time, a little bit outside the terms of the details of the contract, and that's just to be expected. And don't relax a little bit about that and expect that. But at the same time, the most important thing is to make sure that both parties really understand what the other party is supposed to do. So in the terms of the contract, it needs to be clear about what each party is supposed to do. The main thing you're trying to avoid when you're doing the contract negotiation is making sure that both parties actually understand what they're doing. It's not to try and figure out every possible contingency. Because the reality is if people didn't honor their contract, like if the publisher decided not to do something in their contract, you're not really feasibly going to be able to sue them. It's too expensive. So, it's not really an actual option, and vice versa too. Like if you were a little bit wrong on something, they're probably not going to want to do anything either. So don't get overly obsessed with every little detail on it.
let the lawyers read.
And remember that when you get a lawyer, the lawyer works for you, not the other way around. Lawyers will try and figure out protect you in every possible way, and there's just a risk in doing business, and you're going to have to make a judgment call about what that particular clause means to you. You're going to have to make a judgment call of whether that's a real liability or just a hypothetical. Like, do you remember the old Live in Color? Like the fire marshal bill, and you go in and you have the over convoluted thing for how fire could start in like the most bizarre way, and like you could kill yourself if you go through and try and think of every possible thing that could go wrong, and be a little bit relaxed about that, but still be careful.
Good question.
So when it comes to non-disclosure agreements, what's the real benefit of having one?
Part of it is, some of it goes back
for you
to,
having one, or for you signing one with the publisher?
I mean, either, really. Like, why do people
well, so
sign
like
them?
I have people sign them because it's enforcing the things we're talking about. You really shouldn't talk about, and you've said, hey, I'm not going to talk about it.
So let me back it up here. So when you're talking to the publisher, I mean, you're having sensitive secrets and things, they're going to want one in place. You're going to have to sign one with them, and they'll be their NDA. But the NDAs are commutative. So if I sign an NDA with our publisher, and then I'm talking about information related to my project, I have to have an NDA in place because I'm already under NDA with the publisher. So I've got to protect the information because not all the information is my information. And so there's the expectation that I extend this umbrella of protection to all the activity that's going on with me. If you're just your own, if you're your own company and you're doing your own thing and there's not some other NDA with some other company, that's your discretion if you want an NDA or not. Certainly, if I was just me and a couple guys starting a company up, I probably wouldn't bother with an NDA. Because, and I hate to say this, I don't care how great your idea is, it's not so good, someone's not going to steal it, and don't get obsessive about it, and don't go into a publisher and not let them see your pitch because you want an NDA with them. Like, seriously, they're going to laugh at you. Unless you're at the point where you're serious enough where, like, you want one. Like, we do that with publishers because we won't want to have to worry about leaking some information on either side. But, like, when you're small, you don't have any information that's so sensitive to protect. But if it's someone else's information you're trying to protect, you better have one.
Like, we have some people, we talk about some speculative work that we're planning on doing in our age of technology. We talk with people about that, we have them sign an NDA, because it's speculative work, we don't really, we don't want it to get out in the open. We talked about the project we're working on with people, we haven't signed an NDA, because our publisher we're working with doesn't want to get it out in the open. We don't get to talk about it until they decide we can talk about it.
Yeah, and the thing about the reason why NDAs are signed a lot in the game industry for projects is not what you probably think. It's not really to protect the competitive advantage of the product, believe it or not. It's actually there to control the marketing message, because what they're trying to do is when they go and announce the game, that they can control the time and place it actually gets announced. And that's why they're so stingy about it, because what they don't want is a news site going in and talking about some high-profile game way before their actual marketing push, and that's almost always why you see NDAs dealt with. And people are very paranoid about game announcements and things leaking beforehand in general, because it just blows. It can blow the entire marketing strategy, so they don't like doing it.
I think we're almost actually.
We're pretty much out of time.
So. Other questions? Yes.
Just real quickly, do you guys have like a favorite bank to work with, like big as well as small businesses?
So we use Bank of America because they were close. They would open an account. I know from another company I worked at when we got venture finance, they had started with a local bank. When we got real VC funding, part of the contingent, because they were getting $30 million in VC funding, was we used a specific bank. We insisted on, it was a Silicon Valley bank that they did a lot of business with. So I would find a bank where you can go in and talk to the people and build a relationship with them. If you're really going to be running this as your small business, these are people you're going to go talk into for, I need a letter of credit, I need a line of credit, I need a credit card, I need this. But it's going to be, see what offers they have. If you have had a relationship and you know some people at your current bank, talk to them. See what they do for business banking. Talk to other people. I would talk to other small business owners in your area. Look at the Chamber of Commerce. Look for, I don't know if you're in the Atlanta area, or look and see what there is for small business assistance. See if there's banks that provide special services to people. It's like, hey, yeah, that work with them, because they'll probably be a little bit more friendly to small businesses.
Were most of your contractors also from the network of people you do, or is there a resource out there? I mean, I know there's some resources we can get, like coding contractors and stuff, but I don't know how valid they are.
The contractors, is there anyone I don't think there's any contractor we use that wasn't referred to us in one way or another. We said, hey, I'm looking for someone like this. There are sites out there where I can post up, hey, I have these skills and I can do contracts.
To be blunt, the best contractors, they're busy. So, I mean, you may get randomly
They're advertising.
Well, because they don't need to advertise because they've got enough work. So the best place to meet good contractors is honestly being at conferences all the time. Because you'll meet all the professionals and you'll find all the time. Even we've met people at Siege even who are like, oh yeah, I do freelance stuff, because they have enough work, and then that's the best place to find reliable people. Because if they're advertising online, they may not be the people they're probably the people who don't have as much work, Whereas, anyone who's doing it's just
And
busy.
if you find a contractor that you like and works well with you, try to keep that relationship up and moving. Because my previous career, lots of contractors we worked with that were just crap. It's actually an interesting thing you can think of going back to hiring, though. We did a couple of times where we had someone we weren't 100% sure on. So we did a contract to permanent thing. So we said, hey, we're going to bring you in as a contractor for X number of months, and with the option of converting that to full-time employment after X amount of time, just to make sure. It's an interesting thing. I've only done it a handful of times. When I did it, I had an HR and legal department that helped me write up the appropriate contract. But it's something you can do even for someone you're thinking about bringing in full-time. Other questions? We are around. We have a booth. If you have questions, feel free to ask Dan or myself. Dan knows, again, more about talking with people in the industry. I probably know a little bit more about just the business administration side and some of those pieces, but we're happy to help. Why we're here. We're also here building a network, getting to know people. If you're not ready to start something and you're thinking about looking for opportunities, also talk to us. We have stuff now. We'll have stuff later. So thank you all for coming, and enjoy the conference.